The rain had passed, leaving behind the hushed shimmer of a drenched afternoon. Puddles reflected the soft gray sky, and gutters whispered with the last trickles of water. On an empty street bordered by quiet homes and closed windows, a figure emerged, low to the ground, uneven in movement, each step leaving behind a faint print in the wet. He was a dog. Mid-sized, rough-coated, one side of his body slick with more than rain. Blood, thinned by water, traced a line down his flank. His back right leg hung slightly, barely touching the ground. The limp was deep. Practiced, not from this day alone. No one followed, no collar clinked, no leash dragged behind. He carried only exhaustion. His ribs showed beneath the matted fur. And his eyes scanned without urgency, as if the strength to panic had long been spent. From a doorstep across the road, someone noticed. A man sitting still beneath a porch awning, watching the world soften after the storm. He didn't rise immediately. He simply watched. The dog slowed, each breath more strained than the last. He paused in the middle of the road, blinking rain from his lashes. Then, with a body that had learned to expect little, he veered, not away, but toward the figure on the porch. There was no logic in it, no clear smell of food, no familiar scent. Only something in the stillness of the man, the absence of movement, that seemed not to threaten. The dog limped across the final patch of wet gravel and collapsed just shy of the wooden steps. Not with drama, not with noise. He simply folded. His head lay flat on the concrete, breath shallow, eyes still open. The man didn't move closer, not yet. For a while, they stayed like that. Two figures held in quiet proximity. The rain began again, a light mist barely touching the ground. Somewhere down the street, wind shifted a branch, scattering droplets like tiny beads across a car windshield. Then, gently, the man stood. His steps were slow, careful. No reaching hands, no sudden crouch. He walked a half circle, kneeling on the far side of the dog, out of reach. He looked, not at the wound, but at the face. "Hey, buddy," he said quietly. "It's okay." The dog didn't respond with a sound. Only his eye shifted, following the man's movement. His body remained curled, one leg extended awkwardly. His tail, stiff with cold, didn't move, but he didn't pull away. The man removed his jacket, placed it on the ground nearby, not on the dog, not touching, and settled beside him. His palm hovered near but didn't reach. Raindrops began to gather on both of them. The man seemed not to mind. The dog exhaled through his nose, slow and uneven. It was not trust, not yet, but it wasn't fear either. Cars passed occasionally in the distance, their noise distant, irrelevant. Time slowed on the quiet porch. The man, still wordless, waited with a patience that felt like reverence. When the dog finally shifted, just a fraction, pulling his good leg underneath himself, the man lowered his gaze and murmured once more, "You're safe now." The dog didn't lift his head, but his eyes closed, not in sleep, just a moment's rest. The wind moved through the street again, brushing leaves along the curb. The rain thinned to mist, and for the first time in what may have been days, the dog did not walk away. The dog didn't lift his head as the man stayed beside him. The rain had faded into a fine mist, barely falling now, more like a breath in the air than weather. The jacket between them was damp, but it held a faint warmth, a small gesture resting quietly in the cold. The man's hands remained in his lap, unmoving. There was no reaching, no coaxing, only presence. Every few minutes the dog's body flinched slightly, a nervous ripple down his spine, a twitch of the injured leg, not from pain alone, but memory. His ribs expanded in slow, uneven rhythms, and his eyes would open just enough to check for movement before closing again. He wasn't asleep, just still. Cars passed far off, their sound softened by distance and rain. Somewhere behind the houses, a crow called once, sharp against the quiet. The man shifted slightly, not closer, just enough to ease a cramp. The sound of the fabric moving didn't startle the dog this time. He had not moved since collapsing. But something had begun to change in his breathing. Less shallow, less guarded. The man spoke again, barely above a whisper. "You can rest now." It wasn't meant as a command, only a kindness. He let the words dissolve into the quiet. There was no expectation. 10 feet away, the gutter collected water in a gentle rhythm. Drops from the eaves tapped the wood steps. The dog blinked slowly. His eyes stayed open longer now, not searching, just watching. The wound on his side had stopped bleeding, but the skin was torn, raw at the edges. Dirt clung to it. Infection was a risk. Still, the man did not touch him. Instead, he pulled the edge of the jacket closer, just enough that it brushed the dog's side. Not forcefully, not fully covering, just enough for the gesture to be felt. The dog didn't pull away. A small truck turned onto the road nearby and rolled past. The dog flinched again, but he didn't rise. His ear flicked once toward the noise, then fell still. The man glanced toward the street, then back at the dog. His face stayed neutral, not pitying, not afraid. He waited. The rain stopped altogether. Eventually a change came, subtle as the mist lifting. The dog shifted his weight, tucking his front paw beneath him. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was relaxing. His chest moved in a slower rhythm now, his muscles less coiled. Minutes passed without movement. The man reached into his pocket, withdrew a small cloth, and placed it gently in the space between them. It held a faint smell, nothing sharp, just clean. The dog lowered his head again, nostrils flaring once, then settling. When the man rose, it was without suddenness. He stood slowly, stretching quietly, his eyes still on the dog. The jacket remained where it was. He stepped back, not toward the house but a few feet away to a dry patch beneath the eaves. The dog watched him go. He didn't rise. His head remained resting against the concrete, but his eyes stayed on the man. There was no wag, no sound. Only a small thing, the slightest sigh as the dog exhaled fully as though for the first time. Not pain, not relief, just release. And in that shared silence, a soft trust settled. Not complete, but enough to stay. They brought him to the shelter before the sun rose, just as the sky was beginning to shift from charcoal to pale gray. The air held the chill of night, but the wind was calm. He had stood, barely, when the man knelt beside him with a soft cloth and a leash looped gently through one hand. There had been no pulling, only waiting. Eventually, the dog allowed the leash to settle around his neck. He didn't resist. He didn't respond. He simply moved when the man moved, as if led by silence, not touch. Inside the rescue shelter, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and wet fur. Soft barks echoed from closed doors, but the dog made no sound. His eyes shifted, low to the ground, cautious but not panicked. A volunteer crouched down with gloved hands, offering a bowl of water. He didn't drink. It was only when he was gently lifted onto the examination table that the full truth of his condition came into view. The limp was obvious, but now, beneath brighter light and careful hands, the bruises revealed themselves. Old, faded ones over his ribs, newer scrapes along his back legs. The wound along his side was deeper than first thought, a ragged tear that had begun to crust at the edges. Dried blood clung to fur that had not been cleaned in weeks, maybe more. His coat was thick, mottled with dirt and dried mud. Beneath it, skin was stretched too tightly over bone. His weight had dropped dangerously low. There were calluses on his elbows, signs of sleeping too long on hard ground. Fleas moved slowly through the dense fur, sluggish in the cold. When they touched his paws, he twitched slightly, not from aggression, but instinct. He didn't bare teeth. He didn't growl. He simply watched. The vet, a woman with gray hair tied back and sleeves rolled past her elbows, moved with practiced calm. She didn't speak loudly or quickly. She worked in measured gestures, letting him smell her gloves before touching his side. His ears twitched but didn't fold back. His gaze remained steady. The man who had brought him in stood against the wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. The jacket the dog had lain on earlier now rested over his arm, damp and folded. He watched as the vet examined the dog's mouth, lifting his lip just enough to see cracked teeth and red gums. Malnutrition, possibly older than he looked. Scars inside the ears. Faint, circular, the kind left by constant scratching or infection untreated for too long. They didn't know his name. There was no chip, no collar, no history. Only a body that told a story through absence. Absence of care, of protection, of safety. The vet paused, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder blade. "He's been out a while," she said softly. "Months, maybe more." The man nodded once, no words in reply. They cleaned the wound first, trimming fur away and flushing dirt from the edges. The dog flinched, eyes tightening, but he didn't pull away. Pain was familiar. He knew how to endure it. His breathing changed, shallow, uneven, but he did not resist. When the antiseptic touched the rawest part of the gash, he let out a small sound, almost inaudible, like air escaping through clenched lungs. "Almost there," the vet murmured. "Good boy." They wrapped him in a dry blanket after the bandages were in place. His legs tucked beneath him naturally this time, less rigid. He leaned slightly into the folded fabric, drawing warmth without asking. The man approached slowly and sat on the floor beside him, just outside the circle of the blanket. The dog turned his head toward him, not with recognition, but awareness. He was still watching. In the days that followed, the shelter gave him space. A quiet kennel, tucked away from the others. No loud voices, no sudden touches. Food was left within reach. Sometimes he ate, sometimes he didn't. He drank only when no one watched. Volunteers passed with slow steps, some pausing to sit nearby for a while, reading quietly or folding towels just within his line of sight. His eyes followed movement, but not with fear. More like caution tempered by fatigue. He didn't bark, not once. Some nights he stood and circled the soft bedding provided. He would lie down again, always facing the door, always listening. Sometimes when the wind passed through the trees outside, his ears would flick toward the sound, as if remembering something far off, a place, a voice, a time before the silence. On the fourth day, he accepted a piece of food from his hand. Not quickly, not eagerly, but he took it, chewing slowly, his eyes never leaving the person kneeling across from him. It was a small gesture, but not unnoticed. Later, someone wrote a note beside his chart. Calmer. Observe everything. No aggression, just tired. Each day they saw a little more. Not joy, not energy, just layers pulling back, slowly. The dog would rise when someone entered now, not to approach, but to stand. His body had stopped trembling. His fur, now washed and trimmed, showed the map of his past, healed gashes, thin patches, skin roughened by exposure. A long scar along his hip told of a healed fracture, likely from a fall or car. No one knew, but he stood. And when the man returned, the one who had waited with him on the street, the one whose jacket still lay folded on the chair nearby, the dog stepped forward, one careful pace, and stopped. Not out of habit, not out of command, just a step. His eyes lifted, meeting the man. No tail wag, no sound, just quiet acknowledgement, the kind earned not by force but by stillness. The man lowered himself to the ground again, as he had before. Crossed legs, open hands, no pressure. He let the moment unfold as it would. And this time, the dog did not lie down facing the door. He lay facing him. The days began to stretch longer, quietly folding into one another. The sharp cold of late winter softened, and pale light returned to the corners of the shelter yard. In the quiet morning hours, when the concrete was still damp from dew, the dog would walk the perimeter of his small enclosure. Not pacing, not restless, just a slow, measured circuit, nose close to the ground, ears flicking to every distant sound. He had grown stronger. His wound, though still pink and ridged with scar tissue, no longer bled. The fur around it had started to return in patches, rough and uneven. His limp remained, but it no longer pulled his body sideways. It was part of him now. Not a source of struggle, just a fact of movement. The volunteers noted his progress. His meals were eaten fully now, though never in one sitting. He drank often, always after hours. Always when alone. He tolerated brief touches on his shoulder, the occasional hand gently resting there for a heartbeat or two before withdrawing. But still, he did not seek closeness. He watched, from corners, from shade, from behind his own caution. The man returned every few days, always the same way, quiet, deliberate, seated in the same spot just beyond the enclosure gate. He never brought treats, never called out, never clapped or whistled. He would sit with hands resting in his lap, jacket across one knee, eyes soft but steady. Sometimes he stayed only 10 minutes, other times nearly an hour. The dog never approached, but he never turned away either. It became routine, this silent meeting, a rhythm of stillness shared between them. In early spring, a light rain came, brief and warm. The yard darkened under gray skies and leaves turned upward to drink. The dog stood at the edge of his shelter, eyes scanning the sky as drops landed on his back, beating and sliding down the fresh growth of his coat. His body did not tremble this time. He remained outside long after the other animals had retreated, watching, breathing. The next morning, the man returned again. He sat in his usual place. This time, he did not look directly at the dog. His gaze wandered, following a pair of swallows weaving above the trees. The dog watched him from the far end of the enclosure, eyes narrowed against the sunlight. And then he moved. It wasn't quick, no rush, no tail raised. He stepped forward once, paused, then again. The limp was visible but balanced. His eyes stayed locked on the man, not with fear, but something slower. Calculation tempered by memory. A few more steps and the gate stood only feet away. The man didn't move. His hands remained still, resting on the fabric of his jacket. The dog stopped just outside arm's reach. The air was quiet. Even the wind seemed to wait. His head lowered slightly, ears relaxed but alert. His breathing was steady. The man tilted his head just a little. Then he spoke, the same way he had before. Not commanding, not coaxing, just gentle. "You're okay." The dog blinked once, held his ground, and then, with a breath so slow it almost seemed to fade into silence, he sat. Right there, in front of the gate. There was no contact, no reaching through the bars, but there was presence, close and deliberate. From the hallway window, a staff member watched and wrote nothing down. There was no checkbox for this, no line in the logbook for the moment when an animal chooses not to run. In the days that followed, the dog returned to that spot. Not every time the man came, but often enough that it became a pattern. He would sit by the gate, watching. Occasionally lying down, chin resting on one paw, eyes half closed but never unaware. Once he stood and pressed his shoulder lightly against the metal. Not in desperation, not trying to escape. Just contact me. The man didn't react. He simply nodded and remained still. There were no tail wags, no playful nips. But those who knew dogs, truly knew them, saw something clearer. This was the language of trust for those who had learned to live without it. Not loud, not sudden, just a choice, repeated and returned. One afternoon, the man sat longer than usual. The sun had begun to lower, casting long lines of shadow across the concrete. The dog approached again, unhurried. This time, when he reached the gate, he didn't stop. He leaned forward and placed his head lightly against the bars. Not with weight, not with force, just enough to rest there. The man exhaled softly. He didn't reach out. He only whispered once more, "You found your way back." The dog stood like that for a while, still and unflinching, as the wind moved through the trees. Somewhere, a bird called low from a distant branch. The light deepened, folding the yard into gold and quiet. And the two of them, one seated, one standing, stayed close but separate, held together by the kind of silence that only grows when nothing is asked. It was a morning washed in soft light, the kind that settles gently over rooftops and warms the earth without urgency. The shelter had grown quieter in recent days. Adoptions had slowed. Rain had passed. The air smelled of damp soil and early spring blossoms. In the rear courtyard, the gate to the dog enclosures creaked as it opened, just wide enough to let in the day. He had healed. Not completely. His gait still bore the memory of injury. And his ribs hadn't filled out entirely, but enough to leave. The vet had cleared him. His wound was closed, the scar pale and clean. No signs of infection. Appetite returned. Behavior is steady. His name still wasn't known. No one had claimed him, despite the notices. It was likely he'd belonged to no one for a very long time. The papers were ready. A quiet conversation between staff settled it. He could be released, rehomed, or, if nothing else, given a chance to choose. Some dogs, after time in the wild, carried a weight that made domestication difficult. Others surprised everyone. But there were no predictions made about him. Just patience. He walked now with calm intention, not toward the food bowl, not toward the fence, but toward the bench, the one near the wall where the man had sat so often, jacket folded neatly in his lap. That morning he sat there again, hands still, waiting the same way he always had. The gate had been left open, not swung wide, just enough. The enclosure no longer confined him, and no one blocked his path. He was free to wander. Some would have run. Others might have hesitated, unsure of the open space. He did neither. He stepped forward slowly, the limp still visible in the right leg. His head low, eyes watchful. The wind moved gently through the nearby trees, ruffling the fur along his back. He paused a few steps outside the gate, inhaling deeply, catching scents old and new, grass, earth, birds, the faint trace of other dogs carried on the breeze. Then he looked back. The man hadn't moved. He didn't beckon. Just wait. The dog turned forward again. I walked to him. Not hurriedly, not with tail wagging. Just walked until he reached the place beside the bench, and then he sat. Shoulder to wood, not touching, but close enough to feel presence. The man glanced down and gave a quiet nod. "All right," he said softly. "We'll go slow." The paperwork hadn't yet been filed. Technically, he wasn't adopted. The decision hadn't been made by form or signature. It was made there, in stillness, beneath an open sky. The staff inside the shelter didn't react. They didn't interrupt. Someone quietly closed the office door to give space. In rescue work, there are few moments where time feels suspended, but this was one of them. Not because of the ceremony, but because of choice. The dog stood again after a few minutes, circled once, then lay down beside the bench. His body rested fully on the earth. No tension, no hesitation. His side rose and fell with slow rhythm. The man stayed seated, glancing now and then, but never reaching. Later that morning, they walked together across the parking lot. The dog kept close but untethered, following the man's pace without command. His head lowered to sniff the ground, ears flicking as cars passed on the distant road. There was no leash, no collar yet, just movement side by side. The man opened the back door of his truck and laid the familiar jacket on the seat. The dog paused, watching, then climbed in without sound, curled once, then settled. It wasn't dramatic. There was no celebration, no clapping hands, just a door closing gently and tires rolling slow across gravel. They didn't drive far. A quiet road led out of town, lined with trees and fences that stretched along open fields. The dog watched through the window, his eyes steady, body still. He didn't tremble. When they stopped, it was at a small property, an older house with a fence half covered in vines, a shed leaning into age, and a wide stretch of land behind. Birds darted between the fence posts, and the wind carried the sound of leaves brushing against one another. The man opened the door, stepped back. The dog jumped down on his own, landing with a slight thud, legs stiff at first. Then, slowly, he walked forward. Not exploring, not running. Just walking the space, nose to the ground, taking in the edges. He didn't go far. After a while, he returned to the porch where the man sat waiting. He lay down just a few feet away, curling into the shade. Over the days that followed, nothing changed quickly. The meals were quiet, the walks were short. The leash came only when needed, always loose, always light. The man moved about his day with a soft routine, never trying to impose rhythm, only offering one. The dog chose to follow. He still didn't bark, still didn't seek touch, but he watched. Every room the man entered, the dog appeared a moment later. Every quiet moment on the porch, he was nearby. There were nights the dog paced, dreams, perhaps, or memories that still lived just under the skin. But they faded faster now. His body, once brittle with caution, had begun to soften. His rest grew deeper. His eyes, once dull with survival, now held a different kind of light, faint but steady. On the 10th evening, as the sky darkened into amber and the last birds settled into the trees, the man stood at the edge of the field, hands in his pockets, watching the wind move through tall grass. Behind him, the dog walked over and stood quietly by his side. No leash, no call. No signal, just presence. The man glanced down. The dog looked out, and in the hush of that moment, two lives paused. Neither saved, neither lost. Just side by side, where trust had been given, not asked. A soft wind passed between them, stirring the grass in long, slow waves. Somewhere beyond the fence a hawk cried once, distant and fading, and the dog stayed.